The ship came down through the clouds like a giant metal bird. It was silver and shaped like a long oval. The engines made a deep humming sound as the landing legs touched the ground. Steam rose from the wet jungle floor inside the ship. 12 beings from different worlds stood up from their seats. They had come a long way to reach this planet. The planet was called Velafor. It had no people living on it. It had only trees and rivers and animals that no one had ever seen before. Commander Vethalo walked to the front of the group. He was tall, almost 7 feet. He had 4 arms and 2 legs. His body was covered in a hard shell like an insect. His eyes were large and made of many small parts that let him see in all directions at once. He was from a species called the Kathrani. His people had been traveling through space for thousands of years. "We have 30 days," he said. His voice clicked and buzzed because that was how his mouth worked. "We will study the land. We will make maps. We will write reports. Then we will go home." Everyone nodded. This was a simple mission. They had done this kind of work many times before. Near the back of the group stood 2 humans. One was a young man named Danny Cole. He was 28 years old and came from a place called Ohio on the planet Earth. He had brown hair that was always a little messy and eyes that were always looking at things with curiosity. He worked as an environmental engineer. His job was to study how living things and land worked together. Next to him was a woman named Katie Harris. She was 31 years old and came from Texas. She had her dark hair tied back in a simple way. She was a logistics specialist. Her job was to make sure everyone had what they needed and that plans worked out properly. Humans were still new to the Galactic Union. Earth had only joined about 60 years ago. Most of the other species had been part of the Union for hundreds or thousands of years. The aliens did not know much about humans yet. They seemed friendly enough. A bit strange, perhaps, but friendly. The team walked out of the ship and into the jungle. The air was warm and wet. Strange birds with 6 wings flew between the trees. The trees themselves were tall with bark that was blue instead of brown. Everything smelled like flowers and rain. "It is beautiful here," said Sora. She was the team medic. Her species was called the Felusi. She looked almost like a human, but her skin was pale purple, and she had no hair. Instead, she had soft ridges on her head that helped her sense temperature and pressure. "Beautiful but dangerous," said Dren. She was a geologist. Her job was to study rocks and the ground. She was from a species called the Varan. Her body was short and wide, and her skin was rough like stone. Her voice sounded like gravel being poured into a bucket. For the first 5 days, everything went well. The team set up camp near the ship. They sent out small flying machines to make maps. They collected samples of plants and rocks. They wrote many reports. Danny spent his days walking through the jungle with a bag on his back. He collected leaves and dirt and water samples. He looked at everything with wonder in his eyes. The other aliens noticed that he smiled a lot. He smiled when he found a new kind of bug. He smiled when it rained. He even smiled when he fell into a small stream and got completely wet. "Why do you smile so much?" asked Tolix one evening. He was the team engineer. Like the commander, he was Kathrani with 4 arms and hard shell skin. But he was younger, and his shell was a lighter brown color. Danny thought about it. "I guess because everything here is new. I have never seen any of this before. It is exciting." Tolix did not understand. He had seen many new planets. They were interesting to study, but he did not see why one would smile about them. On the 6th day, the ground shook. Danny was eating breakfast when it started. His cup of water began to move on the table. Then the table began to move. Then everything began to move. "Earthquake!" Katie shouted. She grabbed Danny and pulled him under the table. The shaking lasted for 2 minutes. It felt like forever. Trees fell in the forest. The ground cracked open in some places. Rocks tumbled down from the hills. When it stopped, the team slowly came out from their hiding spots. Commander Vethal counted heads. Everyone was alive. No one was badly hurt. "Check the ship," he ordered. "TAL single quotes IX ran to the ship and came back with bad news. The ship is fine, but the antigrav sleds are broken. The earthquake damaged their power systems." The antigrav sleds were small floating platforms that the team used to carry heavy things. Without them, moving equipment would be very hard. But that was not the worst news. Dren came running from the east. Her stone-like face looked worried. "Commander, you need to see this." The whole team followed her through the jungle for about 20 minutes. They came to the edge of a cliff and looked down. Below them was a river. It was very wide, maybe 200 meters from one side to the other. The water was dark green and moved fast. White foam appeared where the water hit rocks. "The Rethaval River," said Commander Vethal. "We need to cross this to return to the ship from the Eastern Survey Zone." "Look there," said Dren. She pointed to the left. There had been a bridge. A natural bridge made of rock that had crossed the river for maybe 1,000,000 years. Now it was gone. The earthquake had broken it into pieces. Those pieces were now somewhere at the bottom of the river. Commander Vethal was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. "Our ship is on the west side of the river. We are currently on the east side. We were supposed to survey this side for the next 20 days. Now we cannot get back." "We have emergency beacons," said Sora hopefully. "Yes, but the nearest Union outpost is 15 days away at signal speed. Even if we send a beacon now, help will not arrive for at least 20 days. Maybe more." Katie looked at the river. "Can we swim across?" Dren shook her head. "The current is too strong. Even I would be swept away, and my body is made for heavy conditions. Also, the water temperature is very cold. Sora and the commander would not survive more than a few minutes in it." The team returned to camp. Commander Vethal called a meeting. Everyone sat in a circle and tried to think of solutions. Talix spoke first. "If we had materials, I could build a crossing structure. But we have no metal, no polymers, no construction equipment. The antigrav sleds are broken, so we cannot float across on them." "What about the trees?" asked Danny. Everyone looked at him. "What about them?" said Talix. "Well, trees are made of wood. Wood floats. Could we build something from wood?" Talix made a clicking sound that meant he was not impressed. "Wood is an organic material. It has very low structural integrity. It cannot support the weight of our team and equipment. And we have no tools to cut and shape wood properly. And we have no adhesives to join pieces together. The idea is not practical." Danny nodded slowly but did not say anything more. The meeting went on for 3 hours. Every idea was discussed. Every idea was rejected. There was always a reason why it would not work. At the end, Commander Vethal stood up. "We will send an emergency beacon tonight. We will ration our food and supplies. We will wait for rescue." Everyone began to leave. But Danny raised his hand. "Commander, permission to take a walk along the riverbank tomorrow morning?" Vethal looked at him with his many-part eyes. "For what purpose?" Danny shrugged. "I just want to look around. See what is there." The commander did not understand why Danny would want to do this. Looking at a river would not make a bridge appear. But humans were strange, and a walk would not hurt anything. "Permission granted," he said. That night, Danny lay in his sleeping bag and stared at the ceiling of his tent. Kitty was in the tent next to his. He sent her a message on his small communication device. "Hey, want to go for a walk with me tomorrow?" A moment later, she replied, You have an idea, do you not? Maybe. I want to see something first. Okay, I will come with you. Danny smiled in the darkness. The alien said it was impossible to cross the river. But Danny had grown up in a place where people did not have fancy technology. His father had taught him how to build things with his hands. His grandfather had taught his father. Going back many generations, his family had always been people who figured things out. He did not know if he could solve this problem, but he knew he had to try. That was just what humans did. They tried. Danny woke up before the sun came up. The sky was still dark blue with just a little bit of orange at the edge. The jungle was full of strange sounds. Animals were calling to each other. Insects were buzzing. Somewhere far away, something howled. He put on his boots and his jacket and stepped out of his tent. Katie was already waiting for him. She had 2 water bottles and some food bars in her pack. Ready? She asked. Ready, he said. They walked quietly past the other tents. Everyone else was still sleeping. The camp was peaceful. The broken antigrav sleds sat in a pile near the supply area. They looked sad, like toys that children had broken. Danny and Katie walked east toward the river. The path was not easy. They had to push through bushes and climb over fallen trees. The earthquake had made a mess of the jungle. But they kept going. When they reached the river, the sun was just coming up. The water looked different in the morning light. It was still fast and dangerous, but it was also beautiful. The light made the spray shine like tiny diamonds. Okay, said Katie. What are we looking for? Danny pointed upstream. Let us walk that way first. I want to see what the river does. They walked along the riverbank for almost 2 hours. Danny stopped many times. He would look at the water and watch how it moved. He would look at the trees near the edge. He would pick up sticks and throw them into the river to see how they floated. Katie watched him carefully. She had worked with Danny for almost a year now. She knew that when he got quiet like this, his brain was working very hard. The current is strongest in the middle, Danny said after a while. But see how it gets slower near the edges. And look at those rocks over there. The water goes around them. It creates a calm spot behind each rock. Katie nodded. She was starting to see what he was seeing. They turned around and walked downstream. Here they found something useful. The earthquake had knocked down many trees. Some of them had fallen into the river. Others lay on the bank, already dead and dry. Danny walked up to one of the fallen trees. It was about 15 meters long and half a meter thick. He knocked on it with his fist. The sound was solid. This is good wood, he said. Strong. Not rotten. But Talek said we cannot use wood, said Katie. He said it is not strong enough. Danny smiled a little. Talek said one piece of wood is not strong enough. But what if we use many pieces? He walked further along the bank. There were many fallen trees here. Some were thick. Some were thin. Some were straight. Some were bent. Danny looked at each one like he was shopping in a store. Then he found something else. There were vines growing on many of the trees. Long, thick vines that went from the ground all the way up into the branches. Danny pulled on one of them. It was strong. It did not break easily. Hand me your knife, he said to Katie. She gave him the small cutting tool from her belt. He used it to cut a piece of vine about 3 meters long. Then he tried to break it with his hands. He could not. This is better than rope, he said. His eyes were bright with excitement now. They spent another hour collecting vines. They bundled them together and carried them back toward camp. On the way, Danny spotted some thin young trees that had bent but not broken in the earthquake. He cut strips of bark from them. The bark was flexible and strong. When they got back to camp, the others were awake. Everyone watched as Danny and Katie walked past with their arms full of plant material. What is that for? Asked Sora. Building material, Danny said simply. He dropped the vines near the edge of camp and went back out. Katie followed him. They returned 20 minutes later, each of them dragging a log behind them. Now everyone was watching. Commander Vethal came out of his tent. Talix put down his repair tools. Even Dren stopped writing her geology reports. Danny and Katie made many trips. Each time they brought back more logs. Big ones, small ones, different sizes for different purposes. They arranged them near the riverbank in neat rows. By noon, they had about 20 logs of various sizes. Danny sat down on one of them and took off his boots. He was tired but happy. Tal single quotes IX walked over to him. His forearms were folded in a way that showed he was confused and a bit annoyed. What are you doing? Talix asked. Building something, Danny said. Building what? With what materials? You have no fabrication equipment, no structural polymers, no adhesive compounds. Danny held up one of the vines. Got these. Those are organic plant fibers, Talix said. He sounded like a teacher correcting a student who had made a silly mistake. They have a tensile strength rating of perhaps 40 kilopascals. They are completely inadequate for any structural application. Danny shrugged. Okay. Then he went back to work. Katie sat down next to him and they began to plan. Danny drew pictures in the dirt with a stick. He showed her how he wanted to arrange the logs. She asked questions. He answered them. Sometimes they disagreed and argued a little. Then they would find a solution together. We need to tie the logs together, Danny said. The vines will work for most of it, but some joints need to be really tight. He looked at his boots. Then he looked at his shoelaces. Sorry, boots, he said. He pulled the laces out. Katie laughed. Are you serious? Totally serious. These laces are made of synthetic fiber. They are stronger than the vines for small, tight joints. Katie shook her head, but she was smiling. Fine, take mine too. She took off her boots and removed her laces. Now they both had to walk around in loose boots. It was uncomfortable, but Danny did not care. They worked all day. The sun moved across the sky. The other crew members came and watched sometimes. They did not understand what the humans were doing. It looked like children playing with sticks. Danny showed Katie how to make a square lashing. This was a way of tying two logs together so they crossed each other. You wrapped the rope around both logs in a special pattern and then pulled it tight. How do you know this? Katie asked. My dad taught me. We built a treehouse when I was 12. He made me do all the lashing myself. Said it would build character. Did it? I do not know, but I can tie a really good knot now. They also used diagonal lashing for logs that crossed at angles, and shear lashing for logs that needed to be parallel to each other. Each type of knot had a purpose. Each type made the structure stronger in a different way. By the evening of the first day, they had a basic platform. It was about 3 meters long and 2 meters wide. 5 logs tied together with vines and shoelaces and strips of bark. It looked rough. It looked simple. It did not look like something that could cross a dangerous river. That thing will fall apart in seconds, said Talix. He had been watching for most of the afternoon. Danny did not argue with him. He just nodded and kept working. On the second day, they added more logs. They made the platform wider and stronger. They created raised edges so things would not slide off. They added a long straight log that could be used to push against the river bottom. Katie spent part of the morning writing on her tablet. Danny worked on the raft while she wrote. When he asked her what she was doing, she said she was making notes. Just in case. By afternoon, the raft was finished. It was ugly. It was rough. Vines stuck out at odd angles. But when Danny pushed it into the shallow water near the bank, it floated. Everyone gathered to watch. The raft sat on the water like a fat duck. It bobbed up and down with the small waves. "It floats," said Sora. She sounded surprised. "Of course it floats," said Talix. "Wood has a density lower than water. That is basic physics. But floating in calm water proves nothing. The current in the main river will destroy it instantly." Danny nodded. "You are probably right. That is not what it is for anyway." He waded into the water. It was cold, but not too cold for a human. He climbed onto the raft and picked up the long pushing pole. "Danny, wait," said Commander Vethal. "What are you doing?" "Testing it. The risk is too high. If you fall into the main current, you could die." Danny looked at the river. Then he looked back at his commander. "If I do not try, we all stay stuck here for 20 days. Maybe more. I would rather take the risk." Before anyone could stop him, he pushed the raft away from the bank. The current grabbed it immediately. The raft spun around once, twice. Water splashed over the edges. Danny fell to his knees and held on tight. The aliens on the bank shouted warnings. They thought he was going to die, but Danny did not die. He used a pole to push against rocks on the river bottom. He steered the raft toward the slower water near the edges. He fought the current with every bit of strength he had got. It took him almost 15 minutes to cross. The raft almost flipped over 3 times. He nearly fell off twice. His clothes got completely soaked. But he made it to the other side. He jumped off the raft and stood on the far bank. He was wet and tired and shaking a little. But he was smiling. In his hand, he held one end of a long rope. The other end was still tied to a tree on the side. Where the team waited, he had brought a rope across the river. Katie understood immediately what this meant. She started laughing. The sound carried across the water. Now they could start building a real bridge. Danny spent the night alone on the far side of the river. He found a spot under a large tree where the ground was dry. He made a small fire using techniques his grandfather had taught him long ago. The flames kept him warm and kept the strange animals away. He could see the lights of the camp across the water. His team was there. They were probably worried about him. But he had his communication device, and he had sent them a message telling them he was fine. Most of the night, he talked to Katie through the device. They could not sleep anyway. They were too excited. They had proven that crossing the river was possible. Now they needed to figure out how to make it safe for everyone. "The raft worked, but it is too dangerous," Danny said. "We need something better. Something stable. A bridge," Katie said. "Yes, a real bridge. Made of wood. Talix will say it is impossible. Talix does not know what humans can do." They talked for hours. Danny described what he had learned from crossing the river. Where the current was strongest. Where the rocks provided shelter from the flow. Where the water was deep and where it was shallow. Katie wrote everything down on her tablet. She was very organized. That was what made her good at logistics. She could take messy information and turn it into a clear plan. "Okay," she said around midnight. "I think I understand. We need pylons in the water to support the bridge deck. The pylons need to be angled to deflect the current. And we need to anchor everything to both banks." "Exactly," Danny said. "The rope I brought across can be the first support line. We can use it to pull more ropes across. Then we can use the ropes to guide logs into position. How do we sink pylons into the riverbed?" Danny thought about it. "We find heavy logs. We tie rocks to them for extra weight. We drop them into the water and let them sink. The current will push against them, but if they are heavy enough and angled correctly, they will stay in place." Katie wrote this down. Then she asked more questions. How thick should the logs be? How far apart should the pylons be? How many rope supports did they need? Danny did not always know the answers, but he could estimate. He could guess based on his experience. He had never built a bridge across a river before, but he had built other things. A dock at his uncle's lake house. A small shed in his backyard. The treehouse with his father. Building was building. The principles were the same. You figured out what forces you were fighting against. Then you designed your structure to resist those forces. We need to write this all down, Katie said. A real plan. Something we can show the commander. You are the planner. You do that part. And you are the builder. You tell me what to write. They worked together through the night. Danny talked and Katie wrote. Sometimes she stopped him to ask for more details. Sometimes she suggested improvements. They went back and forth, refining their ideas. When the sun came up, Danny was exhausted but satisfied. He used the rope to pull himself back across on the improved raft. This time, the crossing was easier because he could hold on to the fixed line. When he reached the campsite, Katie was waiting for him. She looked tired too, but her eyes were bright. I finished it, she said. She held up her tablet. Danny took it and looked at the screen. His eyes went wide. The document was 23 pages long. The first section was about selecting trees. It explained how to tell if a tree was strong enough to use. You looked at the trunk diameter. Thicker was better. You looked at the wood density. You could estimate this by knocking on the trunk and listening to the sound. A solid, deep sound meant dense wood. A hollow sound meant the wood was weak. You also looked at growth patterns. Trees that had grown straight were stronger than trees that had bent while growing. And you had to check for rot. Soft spots in the wood meant the inside was damaged. The second section was about lashing techniques. Katie had drawn pictures showing exactly how to tie each type of knot. Square lashings for perpendicular joints. Diagonal lashings for angled joints. Shear lashings for parallel logs. Each picture had numbered steps so anyone could follow along. The third section covered buoyancy calculations. This was the math part. How much weight could a log support before sinking? It depended on the size of the log and the type of wood. Danny had estimated the weights, and Katie had done the math. I cannot believe you calculated all this by hand, Danny said. I took physics in college, Katie said with a small smile. It is not that hard. You just need to know the formulas. The fourth section was about current deflection. This explained how to angle the support pylons so the water would flow around them instead of pushing them over. There were more drawings showing the correct angles. Section 5 was the construction plan. Step-by-step instructions for building the bridge. What to do first. What to do second. How many people needed for each task. Section 6 was contingencies. Alternative plans in case something went wrong. If they could not find thick enough logs, here was a design using more thin logs lashed together. If the current was stronger than expected, here was how to add extra anchors. Section 7 was the maintenance schedule. After the bridge was built, someone needed to check it every day. Look for loose lashings. Look for logs that were cracking. Tighten anything that needed tightening. Section 8 was risk assessment. What were the dangers? How could they minimize them? What should people do if someone fell into the water? Danny scrolled through all 23 pages. His hands were shaking a little. Not from cold. From amazement? Katie, this is incredible. It is just organized notes. You gave me all the information. No, this is real engineering. This is a real plan. Commander Vethalal approached them. He had been watching from a distance. Now he came closer. You crossed the river and returned, he said to Danny. I am glad you are safe. Thank you, Commander. I have something for you. Danny handed him the tablet. Vethel looked at the screen. His antennae twitched. He began to read. For a long time, he said nothing. He just read, page after page. His compound eyes moved across the words and pictures. His antennae twitched more and more. Finally, he looked up. "You wrote this last night?" "Katie wrote it. I just talked." Vethel turned to Katie. "You wrote 23 pages of engineering specifications in one night?" "We were not sleepy," Katie said with a shrug. "With no modeling software? No structural analysis programs? No material databases? We estimated." Vethel stared at her. Then he stared at Danny. Then he looked back at the tablet. Tal single quotes IX had come over to see what was happening. Vethel handed him the tablet without saying anything. Talix read the document 3 times. The first time, his antennae stood completely rigid. The second time, he started making clicking sounds under his breath. The third time, he was completely silent. When he finished, he looked at Danny. "This is not possible," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" "You had no tools, no computers, no databases. How did you calculate load-bearing tolerances?" Danny scratched his head. "Katie took some physics in college. I built a treehouse with my dad when I was 12. You just kind of estimate and add a safety margin." "Estimate," Talix repeated. He said the word like it was from a language he had never heard before. "Yeah, you figure out roughly how strong something needs to be. Then you make it about twice that strong, just to be safe. It is not exact, but it works." Talix looked at the tablet again. He looked at the section on buoyancy calculations. Katie had done the math using basic formulas and estimated weights. No computer. No precise measurements. Just rough numbers and careful thinking. "This should not work," Talix said. "Engineering requires precision. It requires exact data. It requires computer models to simulate stress and strain." Danny shrugged. "My grandfather built a barn in 1962. No computers. Just pencil and paper and experience. That barn is still standing." Talix did not know what to say. His entire understanding of engineering was based on precision. Exact measurements. Computer simulations. Formal calculations reviewed by other engineers. But here were 2 humans who had written a complete bridge-building plan overnight, using nothing but experience and guesswork. And the worst part was that the plan looked like it might actually work. Commander Vethel took the tablet back. He read through the document one more time. Then he made his decision. "We will try this," he said. "We will follow this plan and build this bridge." Talix started to object, but the commander raised one of his 4 hands. "We have no other options. The emergency beacon will not bring help for at least 15 more days. If this bridge works, we can cross the river and reach our ship. If it fails, we will have lost nothing but time." He looked at Danny and Katie. "You 2 will lead the construction. Tell us what to do, and we will do it." Danny felt a strange mix of pride and fear. He had never led a team of aliens before. He had never built a bridge before. But he had an idea and a plan and people willing to help. That was enough to start. "Okay," he said. "First thing we need is more logs. Big ones. Everyone grab a cutting tool and follow me." The team moved out into the jungle. For the first time since the earthquake, they had hope. Building the bridge was hard work. It was the hardest thing any of them had ever done. On the first day, they gathered materials. Everyone worked together. The Kethrani were strong and could carry heavy logs. The Varan could work in the water longer than anyone else because her stone-like body did not get cold. The Pelusi was careful and patient, perfect for the detailed work of preparing vines for lashing. Danny walked among them like a conductor leading an orchestra. He pointed to trees and said yes or no. He tested vines by pulling on them. He rejected anything that did not feel right. Katie followed behind him with her tablet. She kept track of everything. How many logs they had. How much vine. How many strips of bark. She made lists and checked them twice. By the end of the first day, they had a huge pile of building materials on the riverbank. Logs of different sizes. Bundles of vine. Coils of rope from the ship's emergency supplies. It looked like chaos, but Katie knew exactly where everything was. The second day, they started building the first pylon. This was the hardest part. They needed to sink a heavy structure into the riverbed, where the current was strong. Danny's plan was to build a pyramid-shaped frame of logs on the bank. Then they would attach rocks to it for weight. Then they would push it into the water and guide it to the right position using ropes. The first attempt failed. They built the frame. They tied rocks to it. They pushed it into the water, and it immediately tipped over and floated away downstream. Everyone stood on the bank and watched it go. The frame spun in the current and then got stuck on some rocks about 100 meters away. Talix made a clicking sound. I told you this would not work. Danny did not respond. He was thinking. His face was calm, but his eyes were moving fast. He was looking at the water, looking at the current, looking at where the frame had tipped. The weight was not balanced, he said after a minute. We put too many rocks on one side. That is why it flipped. He drew a new design in the dirt. This time, the rocks were distributed more evenly. He also added a rope system so they could control the frame from the bank as it entered the water. They built a second frame. This time, they were more careful about balance. This time, they attached 3 ropes to different points so they could pull from multiple angles. They pushed the frame into the water. Danny and Katie and Dren each held a rope. They pulled and adjusted and fought against the current. The frame wobbled. It dipped to one side. For a moment, it looked like it was going to flip again. Pull left, Danny shouted. Harder, harder. Dren pulled with all her strength. The frame straightened out. It sank lower into the water as it moved away from the bank. The current pushed against it, but the angled logs deflected the force, just like the plan said they would. The frame touched the riverbed. It settled into the mud. It stayed upright. It is working, Sora said. Her voice was full of wonder. They anchored the ropes to trees on the bank. The first pylon was in place. The third day brought a storm. The rain started in the morning and did not stop. The river rose higher. The current got faster. Water splashed over the first pylon, which was still standing, but now looked very small against the swollen river. We should stop work until the storm passes, said Commander Vetha Al-Adr-Za'el. Danny agreed. Working in the rain would be dangerous, and they would not be able to see what they were doing. But the storm caused damage. By evening, half of the decking they had prepared was washed away. Logs they had tied together floated downstream. Vines they had carefully collected were soaked, and some of them started to rot. When the storm ended, Katie did a count of their remaining materials. They had lost about 30% of what they had gathered. Talix stood looking at the mess. This is a disaster. We need to start over. We need to gather new materials. Danny shook his head. No, we do not have time to start over. We work with what we have. But the plan assumed we had more materials. Then we changed the plan. This was the moment when something shifted. Until now, the aliens had been following Danny's instructions. They did what he told them because the commander had ordered it. But they did not really believe it would work. They were just going through the motions. But now Danny and Katie sat down with the remaining materials and started redesigning the bridge in real time. They crossed out parts of their original document. They wrote new sections. They recalculated the math. Within 20 minutes, they had a new plan. The bridge would be slightly narrower than originally designed. It would use smaller logs for some sections, but it would still work. It would still be strong enough. Dren watched this happen with growing amazement. That evening, she approached Katie while she was eating dinner. "I must ask you something," Dren said. Her gravelly voice was hesitant. "Your species has been spacefaring for less than 300 of your years. My people have traveled to stars for 11,000. Yet I could not have done what you have done here." Katie looked up from her food. "What do you mean?" "The adaptation. The improvisation. When the first design failed, you did not despair or request new equipment. You simply created a new design on the spot from nothing. That is just problem solving." "No." Dren sat down heavily on a log. Her weight made the log creak. "That is something else. My people solve problems through accumulated knowledge and proven methods. When a method fails, we consult archives. We ask experts. We do not invent on the spot using sticks and determination." Katie thought about this. She had never considered that other species might think differently. To her, improvisation was natural. It was what you did when things went wrong. "Where I come from," she said slowly, "sometimes sticks and determination are all you have. We could not always wait for experts. We could not always look things up in archives. Sometimes the problem was happening right now and you had to solve it right now." Dren nodded slowly. "I think I understand. Your species developed in conditions where resources were scarce and help was far away." "Exactly. For most of human history, there were no computers, no databases, no instant communication. You had to figure things out yourself. That sounds terrifying." Katie laughed. "I guess it was. But it also made us good at thinking fast. The fourth day was better. The sun came out. The river went back down to its normal level. The team worked hard and made good progress. They sank 3 more pylons into the river. Each time, they got better at it. Danny adjusted the technique based on what he learned from each attempt. By the 4th pylon, they could get the frame into position in less than an hour. The 5th day, they started laying the deck. This was the part that would let people walk across. Long logs placed on top of the pylons, tied down with vines and rope. It was dangerous work. Someone had to go out on the pylons and receive the logs as others pushed them from the bank. Danny did this job himself for the first few logs. He did not want to ask anyone to take a risk he was not willing to take. The water rushed past just below his feet. The pylons swayed slightly. One wrong move and he would fall into the current. But he stayed calm. He tied each log in place carefully. He tested the lashings by putting his full weight on them. Only when he was sure they were secure did he move on to the next log. By the 6th day, the bridge was almost complete. It stretched across the entire river. It was not pretty. It was made of rough logs and vines and pieces of bark. Some of the lashings were done with Danny's shoelaces. It looked like something a giant child had made while playing, but it was solid. When Danny walked across it, it held his weight without any problem. When Katie followed him, then Sora, then Dren, then the commander, it did not even sway. Talex was the last one to cross. He walked slowly, his forearms touching the ropes on either side. His feet tested each log before putting his full weight on it. When he reached the other side, he stood still for a long moment. Then he turned and looked at Danny. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I said this would not work. I was wrong." Danny shrugged. "You were not wrong to doubt. You just did not know what we could do." "That is exactly right," Talex said. "I did not know what humans could do. Now I know. And I do not think I will ever forget." The team gathered their equipment and began carrying it across the bridge. The process took several hours, but everything made it safely to the other side. As the sun started to set, they took one last look at their bridge. It stood there in the middle of the river, a rough but solid structure connecting the two banks. "Not bad," Katie said, "for a pile of logs and shoelaces." "Not bad at all," Danny agreed. They turned and began to walk back to their ship. The hardest part was over. They were going to make it home. The ship rose through the clouds and into the black sky. Below them, the planet of Vela 4 grew smaller and smaller until it was just a blue and green ball hanging in space. Danny sat by a window and watched it disappear. He was tired, more tired than he had ever been in his life. His muscles ached. His hands were covered in small cuts and bruises from working with rough logs and vines. His feet hurt because he had been walking around in boots without laces for almost a week. But he was also happy. They had done something impossible. They had built a bridge across a dangerous river, using nothing but logs and shoelaces and sheer stubborn effort. They had saved themselves. Katie sat next to him. She was typing on her tablet, adding final notes to the document they had created. "What are you doing?" Danny asked. "Finishing the report. Commander Vethel wants to include our bridge-building document as part of the official mission file." Danny laughed softly. "Who was going to read that? It's just notes about how to tie logs together. You never know. Maybe someone else will get stuck near a river someday." The journey back to Union space took about 2 weeks. During that time, the crew members talked about what had happened. They told the story of the earthquake and the broken bridge and the 2 humans who had solved the problem. Talix, in particular, seemed changed by the experience. He had spent his whole life believing in precise calculations and computer models. Now he had seen something different. He had seen humans create a solution from nothing but experience and guesswork. "How did you know it would work?" he asked Danny one evening. "You had no models, no simulations, no way to test your ideas before building." Danny thought about how to explain it. "I did not know for sure, but I had a pretty good feeling." "A feeling? You risked your life based on a feeling?" "Not just a feeling. Experience, too. I have built things before. Not exactly like this, but similar enough. I knew roughly how strong wood is. I knew roughly how to tie good knots. I knew roughly how water pushes against things." "Roughly," Talix repeated. "Yeah, roughly is usually enough. You do not need to know the exact number. You just need to know if it is big or small, strong or weak, fast or slow." Talix was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "My people would never build anything based on roughly. We would wait until we had exact numbers. And if you could not get exact numbers, then we would not build." Danny nodded slowly. "I think that is the difference. Humans would rather try with rough numbers than wait forever for exact ones." When the ship arrived at the Union station, Commander Vethal filed his official report. It included all the expected things: survey data, sample analyses, maps and observations. But it also included an unusual addendum. The addendum was 12 pages long. It was titled Observations on Human Problem-Solving Methodology. It described what Danny and Katie had done and tried to analyze why it had worked. Vethal wrote about improvisation, about how humans could change their plans quickly when circumstances changed, about how they could estimate solutions without needing complete data, about how they treated failure as information rather than defeat. He also wrote about the document Katie had created. He included the full 23 pages as an attachment. At the end of his addendum, Vethal made a formal request. He asked that the bridge-building document be preserved in the Union's official engineering archives. The request was reviewed by a supervisor at the Engineering Documentation Division. The supervisor was a Kethrani named Vethor. He read the document carefully. Then he read it again. Then he denied the request. In his rejection letter, Vethor explained his reasoning. The document contained no advanced mathematics. It had no computer modeling. It had no formal engineering credentials or certifications. The authors were not registered engineers with any recognized union institution. In short, the document was unprofessional. It was, in Vethor's words, little more than organized guesswork. Vethor received the rejection and immediately filed an appeal. In his appeal, he asked a simple question: if organized guesswork could build a functional bridge across a Class 4 rapid river in 6 days using fallen trees and shoelaces, what might humanity accomplish with actual resources? The appeal went to a committee. The committee reviewed the mission report. They looked at photos of the bridge that the team had taken before leaving the planet. They read Vethor's observations. They studied the document Katie had written. After 3 weeks of deliberation, the appeal was approved. The document was entered into the Union's archives under an official title: Provisional Field Engineering Methods for Rapid Infrastructure Development in Resource-Limited Environments. It was a long title. It sounded very formal and important, but it was really just a 23-page guide about how to tie logs together with vines and shoelaces. Over the following years, the document gained a strange kind of fame. It was not famous among regular engineers who had computer models and advanced materials, but it became famous among people who worked in difficult places. Survey teams going to unexplored planets, disaster relief workers dealing with emergencies, military engineers building temporary structures in war zones. These people loved the document. It was practical. It was simple. It assumed that you had nothing except your hands and your brain and whatever materials you could find nearby. Within a decade, the document became required reading at 3 Union engineering academies. Not because it taught advanced engineering, because it taught a way of thinking, a human way of thinking. Students learned about the difference between precision and adequacy. They learned that sometimes a rough estimate was better than waiting for exact data that might never come. They learned that failure was not the end, but the beginning of the next attempt. Danny Cole never learned about any of this. After the mission to Vilafor, he went back to his regular job. He worked as an environmental engineer on 17 different worlds over the next 20 years. He built things everywhere he went: shelters, water purification systems, bridges and roads and storage buildings. He never used fancy equipment if simpler methods would work. He always built with whatever materials were available. He wrote his plans on napkins and tablet margins and sometimes in the dirt with a stick. His alien colleagues thought he was strange, but they also noticed that his solutions almost always worked. And when they did not work, he fixed them quickly and kept going. Sometimes aliens would look at him with an odd expression, a kind of amazement mixed with confusion. Danny never understood why they looked at him like that. He was just doing his job. He was just building things. Katie Harris went a different direction. Her talent for logistics and improvisation caught the attention of the Union's Rapid Response Division. This was a special department that handled emergencies across the galaxy. When earthquakes happened, when floods destroyed cities, when colonies ran out of food, the Rapid Response Division was called. And Katie was perfect for this work. She could take any situation, no matter how chaotic, and create a plan. She could organize rescue efforts using whatever resources were available. She rose through the ranks quickly. Within 10 years, she was leading her own response teams. Within 15, she was training others. She often told the story of the river crossing to her trainees, not as a heroic tale, but as a practical lesson. You will never have everything you need, she would tell them. There will always be something missing. Equipment that is broken. Supplies that did not arrive. Experts who are too far away. Your job is to work with what you have. not wait for what you wish you had. The trainees would nod and take notes. Most of them were aliens who had never met a human before. They found it strange that someone would deliberately plan for failure. But they also noticed that humans seemed to handle emergencies better than most other species. Years later, when Katie was old and retired, a young journalist came to interview her. The journalist was writing a story about human contributions to the Galactic Union. "Tell me about the river crossing," the journalist said. "The one that changed Union engineering practices." Katie laughed and shook her head. Her hair was white now and her face was lined, but her eyes were still sharp. "It was not anything special," she said. "Danny tied some logs together with his shoelaces. I just wrote down what we were thinking. But the document you created is still being studied at 3 academies." "I know. People keep telling me that. I still do not understand why." The journalist looked at her notes. "Some historians say the document represents a fundamental difference in how humans approach problems. They call it practical adaptability." Katie smiled at the fancy term. "We call it making do with what you have got. Every human learns this as a child. You want to build a fort, but you only have couch cushions. You want to bake a cake, but you are missing eggs. You figure it out. You substitute. You improvise. Other species do not do this. Some do, but maybe not as naturally. Maybe not as automatically. When something goes wrong, we do not stop. We just change direction." The journalist wrote this down. Then she asked one final question. "If you could send a message to the aliens who study your work, what would you say?" Katie thought about it for a long moment. She remembered standing on the riverbank 30 years ago. She remembered Danny pulling his shoelaces out of his boots. She remembered writing all night on a half